All right, welcome to this session of the Ed Collab Gathering. This session is called Connecting Languages, Literacy, and the Natural World with Young English Learners. We have Dr. Lindsey Moses with us today for this session.
Hi, it's Rosalinder with the Educator Collaborative. I'm so excited. I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Lindsey Moses. And for those of you who don't already know about Lindsey, she's an assistant. Did we break up?
I can hear you.
Okay, I'm assuming live. Technology is fun. Just want to make sure you guys can still hear me. Well, I get to introduce Dr. Lindsey Moses. And for those of you who don't already know Lindsey, she's an assistant professor of literacy education at Arizona State University. She's a former elementary teacher, and she works with classroom teachers across the country. She really focuses on supporting the implementation of effective student-centered literacy instruction, particularly in diverse settings. Much of her research focuses on using a socio-cultural perspective to explore how young learners construct meaning with text in various instructional settings. She is the author of 2 Heinemann titles, Supporting English Learners in the Reading Workshop and Comprehension in English Language Learners, both well worth reading. So Lindsey, we're excited. We welcome you and can't wait to learn more from you today. Welcome.
Thank you. All right, I'm excited to be here today with
I'm hearing it through her thing. She should put hers on mute.
Can you hear me? Is it going okay? Okay. So I'm just going to go. I think it's okay. So I'm so excited to be here today with the Ed Collaborative. We're going to be talking today about ways that we can support young learners, engage them with nature and literacy, thinking about language and literacy in sort of contexts that are exciting for English learners. You'll see down below that I've got my Twitter name there, and I'm just going to pop up real quick so that you can see the Twitter name for the Ed Collaborative Gathering. Make sure that there's a space in there before the hashtag 17. And some of the work that I'm going to be talking about today is from the Supporting English Learners in the Reading Workshop, and I'm also really excited to get a chance to share some of the great work that teachers across the country have been doing in supporting this with young kids from preschool up through the elementary grades. So today we're going to get a chance to see a handful of different examples of just fabulous teachers and give some of them shout outs about ways that they're doing this that we've seen to be really effective with young learners and particularly English learners. So I thought I would start with this slide. So this was a prompt that a teacher had given a student for the parent-teacher conferences. You'll notice it says, I want my parents to know I do not like writing sentences. And then up here he's got the teacher smiling and he's frowning at his desk with the word wall. And so I know that that is not what everyone's doing, but I also want to sort of laugh and celebrate the idea that we don't have to just give them prompts and they don't have to just write and copy sentences, but the opportunities for them to explore the world that they're curious about and write about those kinds of things give them really authentic reasons and purposes to use and acquire and share language in a social context. So I always like to start out kind of getting a basics for who are English learners. And we know that English learners move through various stages of language proficiencies. Some people talk about these in terms of NEP, LEP, and PEP. Some people use 3 stages, some people use 4 stages, some people use 5. I often refer to the 5 stages. I refer to some of the TESOL work in terms of how students kind of proceed through acquiring a second language. And so I think it's just important for us to be aware as you're thinking about how you might take these practices and implement them in your own classroom, about where students are coming from and kind of the trajectory that they move through. And so in the first stage, kids are really kind of just beginning to learn the language. This is sometimes what people refer to as newcomers, or they may call it a silent period, where they respond using nonverbal cues, but they're trying to communicate basic needs. This could last anywhere from 6 hours to 3 months. So there's a wide range, and each kid is going to kind of progress at their own rate. And then they move into stage 2, which I sometimes refer to as emerging. And they're beginning to understand more oral language, and they can respond using 1 or 2 word phrases and begin to produce some simple sentences. So as we engage kids in the processes that we're going to talk about in a few moments, thinking about ways that we can engage kids in the early stages in ways that are non-threatening and sort of explore some of the basic social interactions and allow them to use language that's at a level that's appropriate for them. And then stage 3, kids kind of move into the speech emergence stage where their listening comprehension improves, they understand written English, and they're pretty comfortable in social settings. So these kids oftentimes are beginning to have more interactions on the playground, in some of the more free social talk and play times, but they're really just beginning to develop their academic vocabulary. And so when I talk about academic vocabulary, this ranges in everything from things like terminology related to natural disasters, but it also relates to things that we're asking kids to do, whether it's inquiry or research or documenting their thinking. Those are all vocabulary terms that they're getting probably not in a social context outside of school. So kids, as they kind of move through stage 3 and stage 4 into that intermediate fluency, their conversational English becomes really accurate. And sometimes teachers are almost stumped by these kids because they seem to be so fluent in their English with the social interactions and communications, but may need a little additional support with contextualization of abstract concepts. This includes exploring scientific concepts, exploring concepts in research in the natural world. And so we need to provide a little additional support and scaffolding for the language development there. And then finally, stage 5 is when we think about kids kind of moving into that bridging, their near native-like fluency. And so the question is, how can we support these students? And I think there are a lot of ways that teachers, even if you don't speak their first language, can support them. So today I'm going to share some supports that I've seen work in classrooms that have mixed languages. So some students might be monolingual English speakers, some students might be bilingual, might be trilingual, but for me, it really is about celebrating biliteracy and bilingualism. So an additional language is not a deficit, it's something to celebrate, and the more we can support kids as they move through the language acquisition process, the happier, the better, the more productive we're going to see them and ourselves. So WIDA has a lot of resources, and they're free, a lot of suggested supports. And I like the way they talk about their supports in terms of sensory supports, graphic supports, interactive supports. So they talk about giving them real life objects, manipulatives, pictures and photographs, magazines and newspapers, physical activities, videos, right? So all of these kind of sensory supports for English learners so that they're learning and exploring and thinking and talking about the content, but that they also have some additional support in terms of understanding the concepts and being exposed to the language in multiple opportunities. They also have graphic supports that are the kind of more traditional, tables, graphs, timelines, etc. And then interactive supports, I think, are probably one of the most important things we can do for young English learners. And that being said, interactive supports are fantastic for all learners. The more time they have to talk, the more time they have to practice, the more time they have to hear, the more purpose they have to kind of think and talk and chat while they're learning language and learning content. So I'm going to talk a little bit about exploring literacy in the natural world with that sort of background of different ways that we can support students. And really my thinking about this is kids are curious about the world around them. And so we should build on that and foster their curiosity, foster their wondering, and provide the language and literacy supports that they need to participate. So I'm going to show you an example of one way that I like to connect the reading and writing workshop in the natural world with English learners. And so I don't know if you guys are familiar with these Looking Closely series. This one is looking closely at the desert. So as I mentioned, I'm in Arizona, and kids are curious about what's in the desert. And so we like to obviously read to them a lot and show them images that they're interested in, that they have background knowledge in, that we can explore in context. And so what we've done is we'll present them with a text. These are great kind of for young children or older children because they have rhythmic pattern. And so I'm just going to show you a quick example here and then what the students did. So you'll see here it says, look very closely. What do you see? A pincushion monster skin. What could it be? And then it clicks to the prickly pear cactus. And so what we did was we invited the author in for a visit. You'll see there are a handful of different books that he's using there in the images. But this was a first grade in Phoenix, and so a little shout out to the teacher, Mrs. Ogden. And so you'll see here the kids had been exploring the books and working on the rhyming, and then here they've created letters to the author. They're welcoming him. They're using writing for all kinds of contexts, not necessarily related to nature, but their responses to his writing for nature, which then you'll see sort of became a mentor text for their explanation or their exploration of nature. You'll see here, again, the welcome, looking closely. Frank Serafini's books are cool. So again, giving them kind of an authentic context, purpose, and audience for their writing and using language. And then the generation of questions. Kids are curious. They generated 3 of these chart papers about questions that they had for the author, about everything from, is it dangerous, and how many books have you written, and really thinking about what it means to be an author and an illustrator or a photographer. To sort of answer some of the questions they had. So here's a picture of them learning, wondering, and discussing. And again, just the more scaffolds we can provide for those, instruction with visual and language and literacy supports are great. And then we saw kids making it their own. So you'll see here a picture of one of the English learners. She went home and she took a photograph there of a plant, of a tomato plant. She says, "Dear Frank, I like your books. One day I would like to be like you. I'm going to take some in the zoo. I'm going to do it tomorrow." And so we just love the opportunities that the kids had to see themselves as authors and as kids who could take photos. And as they began to generate their own texts and share their texts, it provided a model for language with some of the basic rhyming and guessing in the beginning with macro photography and then scooting back out. But then it also gave them an audience. So it didn't have to be formulaic. It wasn't writing that sentence to a prompt. They were exploring something in their backyard, something that they knew, and writing for a purpose that meant something to them. And so we saw a lot of great responses with that. We then worked with another kindergarten class in Colorado. I've had the opportunity to do a lot of research and consulting work across the country. And so they actually made a kindergarten book. So you can see they put together an iBook after the visit. And so at the beginning stages, what they were doing is brainstorming all of these different ideas for rhyming. And then instead of going outside into the natural world like we had seen in the other class, they decided that they wanted to do a book about their classroom. So I'm just going to show you a couple of examples here so you can get a feel for what it was that they were doing with their writing. So look very closely. What could it be? Or what do you see? A tool, something cool. What could it be? It's scissors. So they each got to take a picture of an item close up. And then as a group, they generated the rhyming. So look very closely. What do you see? Is it a flower garden, a cloud? What could it be? So the repetitive language and the rhyming allowed for opportunities to kind of practice and scaffold their language and their literacy. And then they also had a chance to identify themselves in the book. So it's Ella's skirt. I'm just going to show you one more really quickly. So look very closely. What do you see? Is it popcorn or pebbles? What could it be? It's a saltwater crocodile information book. So you'll notice here that the students had been having a lot of experiences with informational text and exploration and inquiry projects. And so we were trying to help them see themselves as authors and as ways to sort of demonstrate their understanding and practice their new language and context. So building on some of those ideas about thinking about connecting the reading, the writing, the language, and the natural world and curiosities gives sort of a nice, easy segue into moving into inquiry. And inquiry practices with English learners, I think, I have seen to be really successful in terms of engagement and language and literacy development. So I really think that inquiry from the beginning is essential. Unfortunately, sometimes the research has shown that English learners received rote and decontextualized skills-based instruction with sort of a focus on the form of language, as opposed to opportunities to identify problems or curiosities. The great part about inquiry and helping English learners build on their curiosities is they're building on the known. So if they're curious about something, then they have some background knowledge about it, and it gives them answers to, it gives them opportunities to seek answers to their contributions and to solve problems and think about the knowledge. So the question is always, well, then how do we facilitate inquiry literacy practices with ELLs? Similar to we would with a lot of children, it just requires some additional considerations and scaffolds to help them get started and to support the language component. And so I always try to begin with a theme or a unit, some type of content where I can provide all of those initial language supports with content and language objectives. I can provide the visuals and the additional supports, a lot of interaction. And this kind of sets the stage for the theme or content, so I can support some essential vocabulary, maybe some research strategies or content area literacy strategies that I know the young learners could benefit from using in order to participate in the inquiry with peers or by themselves. And so I'll provide mini lessons followed by kind of group and partner independent exploration with the application of these strategies. I'm going to show you some examples of those in a moment. But the idea is that it's not just a research report. The hope is that we begin with a unit or a content or theme to provide some additional background, but the idea is that kids ask the questions. They have the curiosities, and then our work is to kind of sustain the revising and developing of deeper inquiry. So how can we help them ask questions and find answers, and to know that they might not find the answers to some things? And I think that's a celebration. So the approximation of language and literacy and learning is always kind of a celebration on our reflection of the revisions and the contributions to a community of inquiry. And I find this to be particularly true with English learners. And so we just have to find ways to help support managing and measuring student progress, and then thinking about some final projects and culminating events that go beyond some of the initial like traditional things that we think about. So I like to try to engage ELLs in wondering and questioning to begin the inquiry process. So we start with questions like, what do you think you know? So as opposed to a traditional KWL or what do you know, the idea is what do you think you know at this point? And then we celebrate the unknown and clarification of misconceptions. So I'll show you an example in a moment, but we talk about what we think we know, and then we try to either confirm that or move it into what we call the misconceptions category. And anytime we move something into the clarify or misconceptions category, we celebrate. We want them to think like scientists. We want them to work through this process of identifying things they think they know and then building their knowledge. And so I'm always asking them, what do you notice? That's a starting point from which all children can begin to express their understanding, and giving a language frame such as I notice, I see, I think, right, can provide a sort of segue or a running start into participation about engaging in things that they're curious about, as well as asking questions and getting them to a point where they can begin thinking and talking about that. So I'm going to show you some examples of some teachers who have been engaging kids and English learners in this type of inquiry kind of across the country. So here's a look at an example here of what I was talking about with what we think we know. And she had been reading some of Tony Stead's work. And so here she's using what we think we know, and the kids are generating what they think we know, and then confirmed misconception, right? Other wonderings, new information. And so again, this is just kind of a way to celebrate what the kids know, what they think they know, and then the information that we're learning. This next slide is a first grade classroom where they were talking about farms. And so they're thinking about some big ideas. They're wondering why they have farms, what products come from the farms, what jobs are on the farms. And so the kids begin to ask all of these questions and generate some thinking about what it is that they think they know about the farms. And then it's our job to kind of move from wondering to collecting resources. So how do we get kids to move from those initial questions to really diving into inquiry? And a lot of that is related to print. And that could be digital print, it could be books, it could be online, it could be interviews. There are all kinds of additional resources that we can use to access to help support students. the teacher that was working on the farms unit actually had them Skype with a farmer. And so they did an interview about some of the questions that they couldn't find in the text. And so I think the other thing that's really important here, particularly for our young learners and our English learners, is providing access to quality nonfiction sources. So sometimes people think that it's best that nonfiction texts are going to be too complex for English learners, when actually nonfiction texts, particularly the quality kind of primary nonfiction texts, provide additional language scaffolds that support teachers. So instead of you having to provide an image and a caption or a label, all of those components are typically already in there for you. The headings, the bold words, the images, the structures, all provide additional supports for the students that oftentimes aren't present in narrative text. And I love narrative text too, but I'm just saying don't stray away from the nonfiction and the research for English learners or young kids just because they're young. They're curious, and it provides a way to engage with texts that's helping them seek and answer questions that they have. So I'm going to talk about some examples of inquiry implementation, so what it might look like, how we might get them started. So this next slide that's coming up is just a sample. In no way am I saying that this is something that you need to follow exactly. The idea of inquiry is you need to follow your students' curiosities and where they are with their language and literacy. And so this is an example of something I did with some second graders in a bilingual classroom. I was doing some work with 2 teachers there. So they actually received instruction in Spanish all day, and just their content time was in English. It was like English as ESL. And so we used an anchor text. We selected an anchor text on volcanoes, and we identified the content and language objectives. So here you'll notice that we want students to be able to utilize research skills to answer curiosities, to understand informational text structure and features, and learn and share information about natural disasters. And then we created language objectives. So we were really specific with what it was that we needed to do to support the students to access the content, but also what language the students need to demonstrate in order to share their thinking and understanding. So this included listening to information, it included verbally sharing information, and then writing and using nonfiction text features in their research. And so we created learning experiences that included questioning and researching and documenting their learning and presenting. And then we sort of had to gather text sets, informational topics of students' choice of interest, and then decide on some culminating experiences. So how are they going to present their final project and document their research? So this is something that I think is so important and oftentimes gets ignored. We think that maybe we can just have them do a report, or we don't give them a real audience. So one of the things that we found in this work with inquiry and English learners is the opportunity to present for an authentic audience, whether it be a reading buddy at parent-teacher conferences. We've done a family and community fair. We've had them present it to peers. We've found that this gives them a purpose for language practice and rehearsal. So it's a real reason for developing fluency and having opportunities to present in a context that matters. And so like any type of fluency development, there should be a purpose. And so I never ask students to do something that I haven't done myself, and I think that's really important. And so I always tell them, if I'm getting ready for a presentation, I would never just do a cold read as I get up in front of somebody. I create it, I think about it, I talk about it, I revise it, I practice it, I get feedback from people. And so the students have become quite adept at providing support in everything from pronunciation to talking about vocabulary to asking for feedback, because they know they're going to be presenting it for an audience. So in order to get there, kids need a handful of tools for inquiry, and there are many of these out here, and a lot of people have talked about them. And I found that some inquiry strategies to work really well with primary age, particularly English learners, is noticing, so asking them to notice things, having them generate questions. Sometimes I find that to be easier with English learners if we give them kind of a little language frame, a sentence starter. So if it's noticing, it might be I notice or I see, and then kids can jot their understanding on stickies in their research notebooks, on their posters, but it gives them an opportunity to participate. For some of the students in the early stages, they might just write I notice, and then they'll jot a sketch of what it is that they were noticing with maybe a label. So they're still able to share and participate even if they're in the beginning stages of language proficiency. I also think it's important to help them document things that they've learned. We're going to see some examples of that in a moment, and also opportunities for interaction. So kids should be getting feedback and asking questions and interacting with you and with others, not just at the end of their project. That's when all the work is done. They really benefit from the feedback throughout and thinking about the progress throughout. So getting them to document kind of things that they're thinking versus things that they learned, connecting some of their thinking, and also one of the things that I've found to be really rewarding and helpful is introducing some visual representation strategies. So oftentimes when English learners can begin with the visual of what it is that they know and building on their background, that then provides a context for vocabulary, for talk, for engagement with others. And so we talk about different design elements and ways to make their illustrations in their documents aesthetically pleasing. So you're going to see some examples of that and text features and thinking about how they can cite their sources even in the primary grades, and opportunities for some sharing and presenting. So here are some examples of classrooms that I've seen that are doing it well. So let's take a look, and I will give a little explanation of what these are. So this was the bilingual school, second grade bilingual school, Rachel Freevert, that I was working with. And you'll notice here that she's working on the objectives, supporting supportive language and goals for English. So today I am reading books and finding new learning about my animal so that I can become an expert. I'll know I've got it when I'm new learning represented by drawings or writing to add to my poster. So giving opportunities for them to share what it is that they know, but being really explicit about ways that they'll know that they're working towards that. Here, I've also been working with a teacher, Meredith Ogden, here in Phoenix, and she had read some of Georgia Hurd's work, the Wonder Station, or A Place for Wonder. And so she's created these wonder stations in her classroom that the kids just come in the morning. They might take notes about them. They talk about them. They can bring other items in that they're wondering about. And so here the question was, can this pumpkin grow another pumpkin? So again, providing opportunities to engage with nature, things that they know about, and developing vocabulary around this. Here's another one. In the same classroom, she got some hermit crabs. You'll notice they're labeling Steve and Maggie, the two hermit crabs they have there. It begins with I see or I notice as they're jotting down notes in the morning or as they choose to go to the wonder stations. And then actually this week, she was not all that excited, but one of the students brought in some skulls and bones that they had found after a large rainstorm out in the wash here in Arizona. And so they were coming in and talking about things they see. They put it in the wonder station. Kids are able to then participate in language and literacy and sharing about things that they're curious, and that oftentimes sparks further research for the inquiry process. So here are some ways that we help them document things that they're thinking. So these are just stickies. We color-coded them. We found that the color coding can be helpful for our beginning English speakers to help them remember and get started with some of their sentence starters. We encourage them to use their own language, but always offer a starter as a way to kind of begin the conversation. And we find as students get more comfortable and develop greater sort of proficiency in English, they move away from the sentence frames pretty quickly. But here you'll notice these are questions, I wonder, I learned, connections. And then here we've got some kindergarten wondering. I did quite a bit of work with a school with a lot of English learners in Florida. And so if you look at the kindergarten wondering here, you can probably guess what they were reading about. So in Beth Rogers' class, even our youngest English learners were talking about inquiry and wondering. So here in his researcher notebook, he has, I know, 1492, I wonder, and then he's got a picture of 3 ships. He was wondering where there were 3 ships, and then wow, he was really excited that they were looking for gold. So again, alternatives to maybe the traditional comprehension questions, report writing, but engaging with things that they're interested in. Here's another student who's sort of documenting things that she's learned. Here's another student who is using those kind of research strategies to work and think on her inquiry project independently. And then here's an example of some work we did with kind of new concepts and words. So we were noticing that a lot of students were just summarizing they were just summarizing, or not summarizing, they were just copying what it was that they were reading in the text. And we found, we were trying to find ways to get them to summarize. And we had talked about it repeatedly. We had given them examples of it or talked about the strategy. But we found that for our English learners, they were really having a hard time differentiating between copying information and putting it in their own words. So we asked them to work collaboratively and to share with peers in the classroom, knowing that they'd be speaking in English. What are some words that you think your partner might need to know? And maybe you already know what that is because you've been reading about it, but they don't know anything about a storm surge or about a big giant wave. And so then they were able to kind of think through the language that they would need and be metacognitive about their language acquisition, but also the support for their peers that might need some additional opportunities to think about what words might mean. This is an example of a research poster from that second grade bilingual classroom. So you'll notice here they've got some interactive components, a summary, a lot of visual representations, but the students' ability to talk from this poster and these visuals were really powerful. The other thing that we recommend is interactive components, so the opportunity to talk and ask questions. This is a large class you see here. This is the first grade class that I was working with in Phoenix, and we had 29 first graders. So there's a lot of kids, but they're excited to ask for questions, comments, and connections. We introduced some text features, and here's some of the illustrations. So we're using some Cray-Pa here for the world. Here they're doing crayon resistance and permanent markers. Here you'll see they're using permanent markers and documenting some of the things about the horse. And again, here we've got the labels and captions, and here we've got some visual representations. And so we also like kids to begin thinking about citing their sources. And so this can be challenging and really time consuming in the primary grade. So one of the things that we've started doing is we'll actually just copy the title and the author and information, or just take a little screenshot of it and we'll print them out on strips of paper. And we place them in the pockets in books, like where where a library card would be. And so then children can take it and add it to their notebooks or research projects with documented information so that they can remember it. They can still talk about their sources as we're building those research skills, but that they've got a visual sort of reminder and context for them, and it's already there. And so again, using those language frames of kind of, I think, I learned, I wonder, I noticed, my sources, or I got this information from, and giving them the scaffolds to really participate in that. So the next question that people usually have is, what about the management and assessment? Like, how can everyone really be studying something different or reading about something different when they're newly learning English, when they're newly learning to decode? And I would say that these are some of the greatest times to begin inquiry, because we create inquiry notebooks. So it's kind of like your reading workshop notebook. And kids can provide peer feedback with some of the question, comments, or connections. So instead of always just oral responses, giving them opportunities to write down their thinking. And then we do a lot of small group conferencing based on needs. So not necessarily based on topic or that they're all reading the same text, but we might notice that one group of students need additional work with maybe some reading difficult texts or vocabulary support or some of the research skills. Or maybe we're going to pull a group and we're going to work on presentation techniques together, or supporting some of their writing and their written language in English, and then kind of developing inquiry project menus. So it doesn't have to be a rubric, but maybe rather options, and letting them have choices and ways that they can demonstrate their knowledge. And we often find that their posters, their projects, their presentations are much more creative and thoughtful than any of the models that we ever create in some of the initial ones. So the ways that we think about supporting ELLs is really just conferencing regularly. And for the conference, we focus on both content and language. So making sure that we're giving them that experience with the real world, things that they're curious with, the natural world, and then conferencing about how we can support their language, how we can support their research, how we can support their literacy. And so mini lessons is needed, but encouraging feedback and reflection on process throughout. And then asking students to reflect on it and areas that they need help. They will tell you. And so the other thing that we think about as we move through this process is the kind of so what? How do we sustain, revise, and develop deeper inquiry, and how do we make it better? So I ask the following questions and ask students to answer the following questions. So what? Why does this matter? How can I make my research better? And then have students share and present their thinking and be thinking about who their audience is and who they want to present it for and what the purpose is. The revision should be ongoing. So I also think it's important to give students opportunities to think about co-researching, either in partners or in small groups or even as a class, but asking deeper questions as we make connections to the research of our peers. And so just finding that kind of so what purpose. And my thinking about this really began expanding when I had the opportunity. I was working at the University of Vermont with some amazing colleagues at the Campus Children's Center. And there was a natural disaster there, Hurricane Irene. And so there's a full video that you can see on this at YouTube, but I'm going to show you a shortened version today of how we can support students in the sort of earliest stages about thinking about the so what and how we can contribute to the community, what we know about the natural world around us, and why language and literacy sort of becomes a part of the broader context of inquiry and curiosity. So here's the video, a shortened video. So the kids had decided they wanted to contribute to the community. So you're going to hear some of their conversations about that after Hurricane Irene. And so every week they would bake bread. It's part of what they do at the Campus Children's Center, which is infants up through preschool. And so here you'll see they're going to sell it, and then they're to raise money. So you'll hear as they talk about it here.
Thanks for all the good work you're doing. When we gathered with the children to reflect or offered them opportunities to represent their thinking, deep questions and thoughtful responses emerged.
Get in trouble and they got into trouble and make a new building. Maybe they can move where there's not gonna be. Well, that's only in Florida. Oh. Maybe they move to Willis.
So you'll see there, this is a Reggio-inspired Campus Children's Center. And you'll see there, anytime someone says, oh, we can't do it with young learners, we can't do it with ELLs, this is an example of no one over the age of 5 beginning to think about their contributions to the community. In the next couple of slides, I'm going to show you some of their thinking about it, some of their reactions and ways that language and literacy contribute to this. So here's an example of Rashmi asking, how can we get money for the people who are old and in the hurricane? And then here Ben says, well, we could have a bread stand, like a newsstand. And so Bread for Irene kind of began, right? And so here they're talking about what they can do with the trees, how they can put them up and put water on them, and how did trees so big break? And so then here we see them using their literacy to make signs for Bread for Irene. And so it's sort of this community embedded so what aspects of inquiry that I think are so powerful for kids to begin thinking about their community, but also language and literacy. This is another example of sustaining inquiry with our youngest learners. So this was the kindergarten teacher I had mentioned earlier, Beth, in Stuart, Florida. And here they became very concerned about the sea turtles on a field trip they had just down the road from where they were. So you'll see here she's saying, don't litter garbage, right? And so the kids were able to sort of talk about what they might do to contribute to this problem that they noticed. So here's some of her research, but then here's some of their thinking about their work in progress. So you're going to see a quick video here of one of the kindergartners talking about his contribution and what he's writing and talking about. And then I'll show you their final project here.
Joey, what are you working on today?
On the ocean.
Why are you drawing a picture of the ocean on that big piece of paper?
Because the people will know that they don't litter in the ocean.
Why can't they litter in the ocean?
Because the sea turtles live in the ocean. the sea turtles don't die. If you litter in the water, they'll die.
Why? How does that happen?
Well, if they throw the paper and stuff all on the ground, the ocean can come and grab it into the water. The sea turtles think it's jellyfish and they ate it and then they die.
Oh no, so you decided because you noticed that was a problem and you thought making a poster to let people know that that's not safe for the sea turtles would help them understand. You're going to try to help the turtles with a poster?
Uh-huh.
Way to go. I like your idea. Thanks for sharing.
So you'll notice there we have an English learner who's using some approximated and invented spelling and writing, but also being really thoughtful about the content and thinking about why it matters. And his oral language is progressing at an amazing rate about something that he's interested in his local community. And so one of the things I think that is important about culminating projects or thinking about opportunities for kids to take their inquiry somewhere is it doesn't always need to be planned at the beginning. And so with this particular kindergarten, I'll show you what happened, but the idea is that it should provide an opportunity for students to bring their learning and present it in an engaging way that's meaningful. And so this could be a wide range of sort of products or presentations, but in this particular classroom, they became fascinated with the sort of challenges in the ecology and littering and the sea turtles. And so they decided to make a kindergarten artificial reef. And so here's a picture of the original artificial reef that they created. And so as they created this, you'll see here, they've got the artificial reef and they're talking about all of the things that happen in there. And then they went to visit the local ecological museum. And the museum was so impressed with the work that they did. They asked if the kids would bring their artificial reef to, the museum on permanent display. And so the kids, the parents, they're so proud. They were able to write about it, to talk about it, to think about it, to share it with the community. It's still there, and it was a couple of years ago. But again, that idea of providing an authentic context for reading and writing about something that they know about something that they care about, and something in their own community. So they're able to explore language and literacy and visual design in ways that have a broader audience than just an assignment for their teacher. And so some of the other things that we've seen young children and young English learners be involved in and engaged with in this type of work is things from natural disasters, like what we saw with our youngest children in Vermont. I've seen other groups talk a lot about sustainability, gardening and community contributions. There was one group in Boulder, one young learner who got concerned about puppy mills when she was doing research on puppies and then found out about them. So she created a poster. It had survivor stories, and then they wanted to sort of became an activation piece. Other students in both Colorado and in Arizona have done research and pieces on immigration and language policies. And sometimes, again, people think that this type of work is reserved for older students, but you would be amazed at the insight and the language and the contributions that our young bilinguals have also. So for me, it's all about celebrate and support language, literacy, and inquiry and the natural world. And I think through that, we have seen really a lot of progress and excitement and engagement with our young English learners. So my best recommendation would be get out with the students and follow their curiosities and their questions, and with that, support their language and literacy. And I think you'll be surprised at what you see. I've been really impressed with the work of some amazing teachers with whom I shared their work with you today, and what their young learners are talking and thinking and learning about. So thank you so much for joining me in the Ed Collaborative today. I think if Camilla has some text or wants to kind of wrap it up for us, that would be great. Thanks so much.
thank you, Dr. Lindsey Moses, for sharing all these wonderful strategies around literacy and in the natural environment, and how students can take action as young learners, thinkers, and clearly activism, sharing it with the larger community, with friends, and just fantastic examples. So thank you so much for sharing all these strategies. I'm certainly going to take it home back to my educational environment. So thank you for that. We are now moving into the sort of the last session. And let me put that up for you. Dr. Moses, is there anything else you'd like to add to this?
No, just thanks so much. It was so lovely to be a part of such a great Ed Collaborative.
Oh, fantastic. Such practical resources to take with you.
Great.
So thank you so much. And here we go. I'm going to share this last session that will start in just about 14 minutes, the closing session at 3 p.m. with Christy Emras and Christine Hertz, A Mindset for Learning, Strategies for Joyful Independent Growth. We hope to see you there. Thank you.